Welcome to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. We bring you news and analysis from the front lines of the global struggle for social and economic justice. I'm your host, Brian Griffith, and here's what's going down this week in your backyard and across the world. Welcome to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. We have a special May Day hour-long edition today. We are joined by workers from across the United States. First up, we are very proud to be joined by Malott, who is a professor in the Department of Educational Foundations and Policy Studies at Westchester University of Pennsylvania, and also the co-mobilization chair for his union at the university. So thank you, Dr. Malott, for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit about the current strikes? I know we've covered different strikes and different teachers' actions kind of as they've unfolded on the ground, but I'd like a little bit more contextualization for what it is we've been seeing here.
Yeah, great question. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I think, coming from, the perspective of the history of education and the history of labor more generally in the U.S., I think kind of what we're seeing right now, one of the differences between previous upsurges in the labor movement, one of the differences today is that teachers are the largest group of organized workers in this country, whereas in previous upsurges, like between 45 and 55, it was industrial workers that were the largest group of organized workers. Today it's teachers. So whereas teachers participated in strikes after 1945 and before, today they participated in it, but today they are leading it. They're at the forefront of the labor movement today because of, I would argue, because of their special position within the labor movement as sort of one of the last bastions of organized labor. And obviously they're responding to decades of deteriorating conditions that began to develop as the global forces of power shifted from the proletarian class camp globally to the capitalist class camp. And so that's kind of where we're at now, is teachers from West Virginia to Oklahoma to Arizona, Colorado, Tennessee, and spreading beyond that, are responding to incredibly difficult conditions for themselves in terms of, and I think in Colorado and for sure in Oklahoma, school days are 4 days. The school week is 4 days because the education budgets have been so dramatically cut, they can't afford to keep the schools open 5 days a week. And on top of that, teacher salaries are so low, teachers have to work second and third jobs on their day off to make ends meet. So they're responding to deteriorating conditions that we see emerge when capitalism is deregulated, as it has been increasingly deregulated since the fall of the Soviet Union and what has transpired since then. So Marx's metaphor of capitalism as a werewolf that is part of its DNA, that it will always emerge if the conditions are correct. That is, if when capitalism is deregulated, left to its own devices, it will lead to the premature exhaustion and death of the laborer, and that's what we're seeing.
I also want to ask what might the role specifically of teachers being, or at least historically, teachers have been public sector workers. If teachers are now at the forefront of the labor movement, does that represent kind of a qualitative shift than when the workers kind of at the forefront of the labor movement were private sector, or is this simply that is reemerged? And I guess what is the significance of it reemerging in public sector workers, of that labor struggle being so strong there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the significance is, for me, it's significant because, I mean, for one, that's just how it is. That at the height of the labor movement in this country, something around 35% of all workers were organized. That is, they're part of the union. Today, it's down to 11%. And much of that is public sector workers, teachers being the largest, the group of public sector workers. And, of course, that's under attack. The Mark Janus case that the Supreme Court heard February 26th, I believe, and we might know, we'll probably hear how the Supreme Court ruled on that probably by June. I would imagine they tend to release their rulings in batches, so I imagine we'll probably hear in the next couple of months. And it's, for all indications, the Supreme Court is most likely going to rule in favor of Mark Janus, which is going to mean that teachers' ability to collectively bargain and organize is going to be severely limited. And so this is just another step in the attack on workers from the side of capital. We're talking about teachers, and communities and parents tend to really value education, and parents tend to want the best things for their kids. And teachers are increasingly organizing in a way that is directly connected to the communities in which they serve. And so there's been a tremendous amount of support for teachers and their strikes. So, I think that's significant, the fact that they are teachers and that they're doing education work. They're working directly with the working classes kids. And it's significant that the context in which we're talking about. So I think there's going to be, there has been a tremendous amount of community support for teacher strikes. And it's, parents know what kind of conditions their children have to endure in school, with deteriorating textbooks and classrooms that are not properly heated during the winter, and unsafe drinking water, and desks and chairs that are falling apart. This is no secret to them. And it's no surprise that one of the major across-the-board demands for these teacher strikes, and which is nothing new, is for demanding more funding for education. And teachers and teacher unions tend to be very aware that, for example, in Oklahoma, the natural resource extractors, the gas and oil extractors, pay about, I think it's 6%. And in neighboring Texas, they pay around 18% or 16%. And the base salary of teachers in Texas is $18,000 higher than in Oklahoma. So I think teachers are increasingly aware of this redistribution of wealth upwards, cut corporate taxes and cut education. So you're basically allowing the value that's being extracted from workers and the land to be accumulated by capitalists and not serving the needs of the people. And teachers and more community members are in rebellion against this process. And increasingly also, we have to remember that this wave of strikes starting in West Virginia was a wildcat strike, that teachers are beginning to move beyond, I don't know if they're moving beyond trade union consciousness and developing a more revolutionary consciousness. I don't really have any sense of where that's at. I know there's some degree of that. I don't know how widespread it is, but at least teachers are moving beyond their the traditional leadership model in their unions that tend to give too many concessions, and as education budgets have been cut back, they're not getting any return for being obedient and staging 2 or 3 day symbolic strikes West Virginia teachers refused to go back to work after a couple of days, stayed out for 9 days. That was kind of unprecedented and really like set the stage for the rest of the country. And everybody's watching. Teachers are watching in West Virginia and in Oklahoma, where public sector workers it was illegal for public sector workers to go on strike. They're right-to-work states. So you have all these in the areas that are the most restrictive, the most repressive, where you have the least amount of rights. That's where this rebellion is beginning.
Yeah, it's been such an interesting phenomenon to me because I also grew up around educators. My mom has been a lifelong teacher, continues to teach basically same high school her entire life, and I've seen that from teachers. This sort of belief, like of course the conditions I can absolutely attest to having deteriorated that entire time, but I've seen this sort of shift in teachers where it's like when so all these neoliberal reforms started to go in the especially in the 90s and with after the fall of the Soviet Union and into the 2000s in Florida is when it really struck us so prominently with Jeb Bush and whatnot. It was originally just like, oh, these legislators are stupid. They don't know what teachers need. It was basically that, oh, they probably have good intentions. They're just stupid. They're just wrong, whatnot. That goes on a couple decades, and now it's like the pretense has been completely ripped off. There's no sense that that legislators or that generally these state powers have anything but absolute animosity toward teachers, not specifically as a profession. It's not out of personal bigotry. It's simply out of class interest for the legislators and for just generally the charter schools especially have been kind of chomping at the bit to privatize education as well. What do you think the role of that attempted privatization might have played in?
I think it's a huge role, and I think it's directly connected to the right to work states. That's right, the right to work states. Being like those states where unions cannot collect agency fees or fair share fees. That is the average cost per worker fair share on the fees for collective bargaining and representation. If you're in a union, because of the Taft-Hartley Act going back to 47, if you're in a shop that's unionized, but you're not a member of the union, and you have a grievance with the employer the union has to represent you, even if you're not a member. And so the Abood case in 77 ruled in favor, partially of unions in non-right to work states, that you have to pay your fair share fees. And so that could be going away entirely. But that's been part of the deunionization movement, and the charter school movement that you're talking about is another way to undermine unions. And so that all these changes, our teachers, like you said, are becoming increasingly aware of the larger context and the larger attack on education and on the working class in general, especially as capitalism is changing as well. There's, and that's another piece that I think is really important as well. That is, we have the global balance of power in terms of the proletarian class camp and the capitalist class camp. But you also have another aspect that's contributing to everything, and that's the internal development of capitalism over time towards greater labor-saving technologies and whatnot that can be a boom for individual capitalists at the forefront of that, but overall can lead to the falling rate of profit because it leads to a situation where it takes less and less labor hours to produce what's needed. And so for capital, that's actually bad because you can only create profit off of exploiting labor hours. And so if you have less labor hours set into motion at the same time, that's going to lead to a falling rate of profit. and they're going to do things to counter that, such as lowering wages, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think teachers are beginning to make those connections and understand, like, for example, here in Philadelphia, where I'm at, it was estimated a couple of years ago that it would cost around $600 million to update the education system. So students are getting what they need in terms of an education. The same price tag was put on what would it cost to update the prison system and to build a new prison, and that's what they did. They built a new prison instead. And that's kind of, partly what's driving that is the labor-saving technologies, and you don't need the same amount of people to produce what's needed anymore. And so, of course, situated in a white supremacist context, Black workers tend to be the last hired and the first fired. So you have this ramped up white supremacy and police killings in Black communities, Black working class communities. So that's what we're seeing. The intensification of the anti-Black racism and demonization, and this move to a school to prison pipeline. It doesn't make economic sense from a capitalist perspective to educate a group of potential workers when there's no jobs, there's no potential to exploit them. And so what you do with entire segments of the community that are redundant or no longer needed from a capitalist perspective, you build more prisons. So that's, the kind of the bigger picture in terms of where capitalism is heading, according to its own internal logic. So clearly there's no future in capitalism. And I think that realization it's spreading throughout teachers and throughout society in general. And we've seen that. Maybe like the first spark maybe was the battle in Seattle against the World Trade Organization meetings in 1999. We have Occupy Wall Street, Movement for Black Lives, and then kind of Bernie Sanders exploiting this rise in the popularization of socialism. So I think more and more workers are beginning to realize that we need something qualitatively different than what exists. There might not be a widespread understanding of what that is, but I think that's growing and developing as we're moving forward. And, we'll see, what role, the increasing role teachers are playing in that movement.
Absolutely. So many sort of interesting thoughts there. We have a couple minutes left. I'd like to talk very briefly, because we've been talking to everybody about what's going on for May Day. What has been going on for May Day, kind of in Philadelphia where you are?
Yeah, so there's a demonstration today in Philadelphia. I believe there's some panels. But I'm teaching today on May Day, and just like every year, none of my students had ever heard of May Day and ever heard of the Haymarket Massacre in the 1870s. And so, a number of people will cancel classes on May Day, but I always feel like it's more beneficial to actually have class, because the students aren't necessarily going to learn anything about May Day on their own. And so we talk about the May Day massacre and the fact that the police were, just as war is incentivized today. When we look at this, developing peace on the Korean Peninsula, the major military corporations in the U.S. lost about combined like $10 billion of value with this projected peace on the Korean Peninsula. So really like making those connections between war and its incentivization. It was the same thing in Chicago, that this like capitalism's militia they had a slush fund to paying them to attack workers, and that is workers on strike and the labor movement. And once they had arrested all of the major leaders and had kind of suppressed labor, the police, they didn't want that money to go away. So they started trying to create their own problems and chaos and hiring fake workers to create problems so they could keep getting paid. So there's a lot of really interesting history around May Day and its most contemporary manifestation that is really important for students who want to be teachers and who to understand and why they don't learn about May Day. And if they do, you might have one paragraph in your history book that kind of throws out some blanket demonization of workers and thank goodness the police were there, and then you move on from that real quick without any real significant thought. So for me, May Day is always teaching about May Day to people that are studying to be teachers.
Yeah, such an important thing there, and of course we are on that topic of a Korean piece, which we didn't really get to cover in this episode. Obviously, we are all shedding a tear for Lockheed Martin's profit margin here. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you again for joining us. We've been talking to Dr. Curry Malott, who is a professor in the Department of Educational Foundations and Policy Studies at the University of Westchester in Pennsylvania. Happy May Day and stay tuned. Welcome back to People's Republic. For this segment, we are joined in New Orleans by Quest Riggs of the New Orleans Workers Group to talk about the workers' struggle going on out there. Thank you, Quest, for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me a little bit about what the state of workers' struggle in New Orleans is. What are the kind of main issues that the New Orleans Worker Group tackles and hopes to tackle?
Well, in New Orleans, the working class communities and the oppressed communities face a whole litany of issues. Among the most oppressive are the issues relating to the tourism industry, the issues relating to ICE and deportations, gentrification, pretty much similar issues as other major cities in the United States, except New Orleans is exceptional in how grounded industry is in tourism, and how that tourism industry kind of shapes the entire environment for working people. And
I've experienced that pretty much everywhere I've gone and everywhere I've lived. I originally come from a part of rural Florida that was kind of taken over by that tourism industry. And then coming out to Austin, we see so much of the same thing out here as well. The cities, no matter where it is you go, pander to this very kind of mobile class of the kind of wealthy elites at absolutely at the expense of their own workers in almost every sort of circumstance. I feel like the way that plays out is different, but it's kind of the basic same formula in every city, the same formula of gentrification in every city, kind of across the nation right now, kind of across the country.
And it's kind of, in New Orleans, it has the extra quality that the entire thing that is being sold to the tourists is working class culture, So at the same time that workers are producing culture in real time, by producing the music, producing the food, serving the food, producing the art, etc., and producing the general, like if you talk to tourists or transplants in New Orleans or anything, it's and locals, the common theme is that it's the people who create what makes New Orleans special. It's New Orleanians are the basis for everything, especially Black New Orleanians are the basis of everything.
And how is it that the New Orleans Workers Group fights back against that?
Well, New Orleans Workers Group is it's a modest organization, but our basic function is to bring news and consciousness to oppressed communities, to expose what's going on in the communities, because, just like everywhere else, the realities are buried under, mounds of ideological fluff, for lack of a better term. Our newspaper, called The Workers' Voice, previously we had a newsletter that was successfully distributed, but with producing a newspaper, we're expanding the amount of information and the amount of copies that we can put across the city. And otherwise, members of the New Orleans Workers Group participate in the struggles that are going on.
There's been a certain awakening within the so-called Trump era, whatever that means to people. There's been a renewed interest by a lot of people in kind of further action, but I think a lot of people weren't sure quite where to go with that. We saw a lot of people pushing either into sort of an electoral elections, trying to like, hey, let's restore the Democratic Party, whatnot. We saw a lot of people go to kind of Antifa type organizations where the goal is sort of immediate action against fascist forces without kind of a long-term plan. What kind of distinguishes this need to train people for kind of a longer term struggle within a kind of mostly, it seems like, a socialist context?
I think the key distinguishing factor is the recognizing the importance of theory in general, particularly Marxist-Leninist theory, and theory that inform general theory that informs how capitalist society functions, how the capitalist state functions, and then more particular theory, for example, what's particular about the state in New Orleans, or what's particular about where the surplus value in New Orleans is produced. That's kind of how we've gotten this analysis of the tourism industry and the strength of workers in the hospitality industry. You had mentioned Antifa, which, I'm not going to say they haven't done valuable work in New Orleans and other places. But as you kind of hinted at, it's almost like immediate gratification, as opposed to what's going to get freedom.
In addition to the newspaper you put out, you also have a kind of radio show as well. Can you tell me a little bit about that project, how it started, and what you hope to accomplish with that?
The radio station, just like the Workers' Voice newspaper, is basically meant to explore the issues, both local and national and international, that working people in New Orleans have to grapple with, and doing it from a really down-to-earth working class perspective, in a way that anybody can engage with, and can, you hear something on the radio, you're flipping through the channels and hear a view in a way that immediately impacts you, and then you can sit with that for a while. And so just like the paper, it's basically to create this apparatus of working class politics, working class views and ideas circulating in the air, so that workers have that much more power and that much more maneuverability in the face of the many evils that confront them.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely, it's so important right now for people to take advantage of whatever platforms they're able to get, because our corporate media continues to consolidate so much.
Exactly.
Yeah, we are going to have to leave it there. I want to, in the last minute we have, if you can tell us where people can find out more information about the New Orleans Workers Group and your different media publications.
Sure. So people can listen to Workers' Voice Radio at WHIVFM.org on Saturdays at 5 to 6 p.m. They can also find the previous shows on SoundCloud if they type in Workers' Voice New Orleans. Then they can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/New Orleans Workers. We also have an Instagram and Twitter, and we have a website, nolaworkers.org.
All right. Thank you very much. This has been Brian Griffith on People's Republic. We have been talking with Quest Riggs of the New Orleans Workers Group for our special May Day episode. Stay tuned. Welcome back to People's Republic. This is Brian Griffith. We are now talking with Malcolm Suber, also of the New Orleans Worker Group. Thank you, Malcolm, for joining us.
Oh, thanks for inviting us.
So can you tell me a little bit about, what you do and, what your kind of role with the New Orleans Workers Group is all about?
Okay, I'm one of the founding members of the New Orleans Workers Group. And we were founded basically to try to build a revolutionary workers' movement in the city of New Orleans, based upon, of course, workers studying the science of Marxism, Leninism, and studying the science of revolution so that they can be clear about this capitalist society that we live in and the task that the working class must assume if the working class is to become the ruling class. And so that's a big task, of course, given the complete dominance of the bourgeois media and bourgeois educational system in this country. So people are pretty much ignorant of the whole history of revolutionary struggle by the working class in this country to establish, rights and privileges for the working class. And even the May Day itself, is basically unknown by the vast majority of working people in this country. And many of them, of course, don't know the origins of this May Day being celebrated internationally. It was born right here out of the struggle of the U.S. working class for the 8-hour day. And, so those are the kinds of things that we really want to remind people of. And, of course, there has been a revival of May Day demonstrations in this country, actually growing out of the immigrant struggle. The Mexican workers and the immigrant workers have actually helped to spread the basic understanding that May Day is International Workers' Day, and it is a day of struggle and a day of advancing the program of the working class and its battle against the capitalist class. And that's the thing that we are really trying to focus on here in New Orleans in the workers group, is to really educate the working class about its mission and its task if we are to gain freedom and liberation. And on today, we are marching from Grace United Church in New Orleans on Canal Street to City Hall. And this is a joint demonstration being co-sponsored by ourselves and the Workers' Center and Congresso and the Day Laborers Movement. And we are working in solidarity with each other to make it as broad as possible. But there we have a sanctuary situation at Grace United Methodist, where one of our contacts is actually living there as a sanctuary against the purported deportation that they're trying to order him to go back to his country.
Wow, that's such a kind of harrowing situation to be in, and it's something that is sadly all too familiar. Where we see ICE targeting obviously all workers. ICE targets the most kind of oppressed and marginalized sections of the working class, but also going after specifically those who choose to become politically conscious and politically active. ICE has targeted them with a particular vitriol that seems to be reserved for those who dare to question their position in life.
Yeah, that's correct. I often say when I'm speaking to workers is, it is clear that we are in a war, but the ruling class is clear about that, and they are actually waging war against us. And we are so asleep that we don't recognize that if we are going to get free, we got to wage war against the ruling class. And that's a hard thing for people to grasp, but there have been revolutionary times in this country when people did recognize our class and national interest and fought bravely. And that's a history that many of our working class comrades and friends don't know, and that's something that we have set out as part of our responsibility in the workers group, is to educate the working class about the class struggle that has occurred in Louisiana and New Orleans and in the South. And, we think that it's very important as part of that we build as big a May Day commemoration as we can muster here in New Orleans. So we're expecting a few hundred people. And we will march under many banners and have militant chants going down and reminding working class people that this is our day, and that all across the world, in most countries of the world, this is a holiday. And yet, we in the country where it was founded, and many of us don't even know that history.
It's also interesting to me, of course, how the U.S. more than any other country has crushed the history of May Day, even though so much of the workers' struggles have flared up here from time to time. Obviously, we're in the imperial core. We're at the kind of center of the empire, so it often seems that we're the farthest from a real people's revolution, but it is so important, as you said, to remind people that that so much of the most active, really, workers' rebellions have happened right here within the U.S., especially, again, by those most marginalized populations, by LGBTQ people, by especially Black and brown communities that have, I feel like within a lot of sort of white working communities, there's still that sense. There's still this sort of this illusion that white working communities aren't workers or aren't exploited or can work their way out of this. But I feel like that real consciousness always seems to emerge out of especially Black and brown communities where it's very clear what the class structure of American society is like.
Yes, it's very clear, and you would think it would be much easier for us to educate our people, but there's so much distortion of our history, and so much divisive activity carried on by the ruling class to separate workers of different nationalities and different sexes, that we have not successfully understood how do we combat that divide and conquer scheme, which is as old as the ruling classes into antiquity. And, we have got to arm ourselves with revolutionary theory, which explains how capitalism works, explains the mission of the working class. And if we can get that basic understanding widely understood and accepted, then I think that all of our organizing work would be much more successful, and that we would be making more progress. But I am really hopeful and excited about the period that we're living in right now. There seems to be a resurgence in the revolutionary struggle of the workers and the oppressed in this society. And of course, the bourgeoisie is so selfish and self-centered that they don't recognize the problems that they're creating for working people. And sooner or later, the Trump regime and right-wing machinations are going to be exposed for the lies that they are, and that people will begin to recognize what are our fundamental responsibilities and our fundamental duties. And once we begin to broadly recognize that, I think we can build a revolutionary movement in this country that will finally bring an end to the capitalist regime.
In our last couple of minutes, any sort of last thoughts in the way you have seen the changes either in people's consciousness or the changes in the kind of actuality of the struggle unfold over time since you started the New Orleans Workers Group?
Well, I guess the most important aspect of the New Orleans Workers Group is that the majority of our comrades are native Southern white workers, which is a real advance as far as I'm concerned, because I've been in the revolutionary struggle for 5 decades. And in the past, most of our comrades, white comrades, were, from the East Coast or the Midwest. And, of course, we have had to educate even our young white workers from this area that white workers in the South have always waged struggle, and that it has not been 100% reaction, and that we've got to raise that up in order to win the white workers in the South away from the white chauvinist, white supremacist ideology that they've been groomed with. And I think if we're able to make those breakthroughs, the struggle of working class will advance many decades faster than during the Obama administration.
Yeah, so much really, really valuable stuff there. Really appreciate you coming on. We're going to have to wrap it up for now. We've been joined by Malcolm Suber with the New Orleans Workers Group. Really appreciate you being on the show once again.
All right, thank you. Happy May Day to you.
Yes, same to you. This has been, Brian Griffith. Stay tuned for more People's Republic in just a moment. Welcome back to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. For our final segment, we are talking with Luis Francisco Rangel of the band All Rhythms Ensemble, who's going to be playing a show on May 9th at the Sahara Lounge. This is going to be a concert for the working class put on by the People's Congress of Resistance. Thank you, Luis, for joining the show today.
Thanks very much.
So tell me a little bit first about the band itself. What is the band about? What do you all do? And what's the goal?
Yeah, sure. So the band is All Rhythms Ensemble. It started as an organization, an educational outreach organization 6 years ago. The band leader Ian Fry started it, and the idea was to teach kids, mostly elementary and middle school, also some high school, about Latin American music and also Latin American culture through music. That started around 6 years ago. It became an official Texas nonprofit about 2 years ago. And just recently, Ian had the idea to form band made out of professional musicians. Most of us are also teachers in the All Rhythms educational outreach program. And we've been playing for about 6 months or so. And we've performed at venues in the past, but we've mostly done shows at elementary schools as kind of a mix between the professional ensemble / education part.
So what's the repertoire of this group look like? Where are you drawing your inspirations from?
Right. So ideally, we'd want to encompass any sort of quote unquote world music, whatever that means. Basically, we're starting off with Latin America, specifically Cuba and Brazil. We do Brazilian rumba and Cuban rumba and Brazilian chordos and samba music.
Is there anyone who's kind of the main leader of the group in terms of like where the music is being drawn from? Can anyone just kind of suggest a piece? Or
well, that's a good question. So the main person leading it is the founder of the organization, Ian Fry. Also, the guitarist in the group, Vijay Manier. Sorry if I mispronounced that name, Manier. He is also one of the main people that started this particular ensemble. He's the one who contacted me. And he is the Brazilian side of things. He studies a lot of Brazilian inspired music, and he brings he's half of the repertoire, maybe a little less than half of what we do so far. Kind of, I guess, our slower tunes are from Brazil.
Okay, and how successful has the educational aspect of this been?
I'd say the educational aspect of it has been very successful. There's been several contracts with a number of elementary schools, and I believe it's also a sort of partnership with Austin Soundwaves. We at least use the same space every once in a while. And, recently we've had a number of shows at elementary schools. I think our latest one was at Barrington Elementary, where it was basically just a party, but like an educational party, in the sense that we gather in cafeteria, we bring hors d'oeuvres and drinks and stuff, and what we did was we set up 3 of the cafeteria tables, those long tables, and we just put a bunch of percussion instruments on them, just drum heads and tambourines and cowbells and bunch of shakers and maracas and stuff, and a lot of drumsticks, so that then the kids and their parents as well come. The parents usually don't get involved as much, but the kids, they have a blast. They just grab those drumsticks, they start banging on stuff. You know how kids are. They just like to take things and just do kind of whatever. And that kind of attitude works really well for this sort of thing, because we'll play some tunes and we tell them to play along with us, and we teach them a few rhythms that will be featured in the tunes, most notably the clave rhythm. I don't know if you want me to...
Yeah, go for it.
That sort of thing. So we basically just do that, and we get them we do it, and then they like respond. We do a call response thing, and then we set it up in the context of a song so that they can do it. A lot of the times they just kind of end up doing whatever they want, which also works really well. This last time that we did it, to me at least, it just sounded like a Brazilian like carnaval, like just people like banging on drums and just having a blast. And we had a little bit of a repertoire for what we were going to play, but we just watched the kids having so much fun, and then we started just kind of having so much fun. We all just started jamming, not really playing any specific tune necessarily. And we ended up switching instruments ourselves and just picking up, like, I went out and like picked up a tambourine, and I started just kind of playing tambourine, and then some kid looked like they were interested, so I handed it off to the kid, and I took a cowbell and I started doing a cowbell. So that sort of thing.
That's such a so much more enriching an experience than so much of my own music education. I'm people who are regular listeners to my show for the political commentary are going to be learning a lot about me in this segment. So I sort of come from the music education background, and one of the reasons I left was because there weren't these kind of experiences. There weren't. This was not generally the focus of the music ed that I saw. Like for what I saw, it was so much focused on sort of breaking down the rhythm. So it's like anyone who's ever taught music know that kids are so intuitive with their rhythms. You really
Definitely.
don't need to teach them much. You need to kind of keep them on the same page sometimes. But generally, the way music ed is taught is entirely the opposite of that, where the assumption is we have to destroy everything kids know about rhythm. If they can't yet understand why the rhythm is that way, they're not allowed to know it. I feel it's like so much of the underpinning of quote unquote music education as it pertains to kind of like we have to teach these very like Western, I don't even want to call them Western aesthetics because it's Western non-aesthetics in a certain way to me.
Right. Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I also come from a kind of an academic musical background and yeah, it's kind of a more of a classical tradition to have this like these set rules that you have to follow and you have to do them this set way. And I mean, there's a certain benefit to learning the way things are supposed to be, but at the end of the day, that's not what playing music is about. And that's not really what we're trying to teach these kids. What we're trying to teach these kids is just more kind of just how to connect with people and have like, rich, fruitful experiences as people. And I think that comes through a lot more in folk traditions. And I want to say maybe it's really heavily exemplified in a lot of Latin American folk traditions, at least in the Cuban tunes that we do. Even when we're rehearsing, we're all professional musicians. We've all had this background. We're relatively comfortable with the concept of do it this specific way. But in these tunes, it becomes so blatantly clear that it really doesn't have to be one particular way. Sure, there are these kind of loose rules that we all follow, but again, coming back to the clave rhythm, you can start it either on the on one side of it. There's two basic sides of it. You can start it on either the 2 side or the 3 side, and a lot of people will say, no, you have to do it on this side or the other. But on these tunes, it's like, no, you can do it on either one. It works great as long as you're just kind of jamming and you're together with everyone else that's playing. It's going to sound great, and it really does. And
I think it's a different approach to how we see what is a quote-unquote rule in music. Mm-hmm. I think so much of what gets considered music theory is entirely prescriptive. You take what is essentially descriptive, you listen to what this particular song was or this particular genre was, and you say, this is the way this always needs to sound.
Right. And I mean, the funny thing about that is that the way that music theory came to be is that basically a bunch of music nerds got together and listened to a lot of pre-existing music and thought to themselves, why does this sound good? Why does this work? And then just came up with a bunch of rules. But all these composers and pieces that they studied broke those rules all the time. These are all just like really vague generalizations that it's not even close to being the way it should be all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that because it's not, I also have issues with people who just sort of break all of the musical rules for the sake of quote unquote innovation or whatnot. So that
right.
that other extreme of we're going to learn everything to do so we can do exactly the opposite of that thing for the sake of our name being in the history book as someone who innovated something.
Yeah.
I feel like that kind of reached its peak in the 20th century. That's not as much of a thing, but that kind of alternating tradition of let's break all the rules just for the heck of it also kind of stays with us.
Right. That's not the idea either. I mean, certain rules came to be for a reason, like it's not that it's bad that those rules are there, but it's also not ideal to just follow them blindly, right? There's a good middle ground that you want to get to.
Yeah. And it's to me, even more than middle ground, it's just about really feeling out that community. It's about really feeling out the other people you're playing with.
Exactly. I mean, it's music is at the end of the day, it's kind of more of a language than anything else. And what is language there for if not to connect people together, right?
That was really Shakespearean.
Oh, yeah.
So let's turn back to this concert. And in the interest of full disclosure, I am also kind of involved in this concert as part of the planning process. This is with the People's Congress of Resistance. This is not a co-op event. This is something that we've kind of worked on, but that I just think because it has some educational value, we should be talking about a little bit. So we are essentially bringing together what's called the concert Music for the Working Class. This is a concert for the working class, Latin dance night going on May 9th at the Sahara Lounge from 8 p.m. to pretty much midnight. You know, just like the music we were just describing. We're going to kind of wing it. So, you know, do you have any sort of specific thoughts on the way that this style of music relates to really it being a working class culture?
Mm-hmm. Well, in Austin specifically, Austin has a very prominent Hispanic working class community. And a lot of the elementary schools and middle schools that we teach at are, primarily low-income families in low-income neighborhoods. And again, just as far as outreach goes, that's kind of what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to give these kids, a chance to, be like the most that they could be in a world that kind of squanders the opportunities, the few opportunities that they can get. So this kind of music, aside from that, is also the music itself is folkloric in nature and comes from traditions that are from these also types of cultures, oppressed people, working class people, trying to live as happily as they can, coming up with their own traditions, coming up with their own musical styles, and living in their own communities.
Yeah, and I also think it really, especially because so much of this music is coming from the global South. This is coming from what we consider to be the global working class in a lot of ways. Really, so much of what we think of as music, as culture of the working class or whatnot, is so kind of centered within the kind of U.S. Ethnic discourse or whatnot. But when you think of the countries that the styles of music we're talking about come from, these are countries that have faced so much intense imperial oppression from the United States, and that really that makes the significance to me of these traditions so much more significant, really, so much more intense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, we're gonna have to leave it there. We have been talking with Luis Francisco Rangel of the All Rhythms Ensemble. If people want to learn more about the All Rhythms Ensemble, where can they find out more information?
We do have a Facebook page, All Rhythms Ensemble. It has all the information that you might want. And as an extra side note, I do want to say that the All Rhythms Ensemble will be collaborating with the Austin Symphony Orchestra on June 20th for an event that is similar to what I just described that we did at the elementary school, but it will be at the new public library.
Cool. Really interesting stuff going on there. We're going to leave it there for now. This has been People's Republic with Brian Griffith. We have been talking about the upcoming concert that's going to be put on by the People's Congress of Resistance on May 9th at the Sahara Lounge from 8 p.m. to approximately midnight. Kind of a fun music for the working class Latin dance night. You can find the information on Facebook if you are so interested. This is Brian Griffith signing out. That's all we have for this week. You have been listening to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. You can find our show on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher by typing in People's Republic. Or you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at People's Radio ATX for more news and analysis. Thank you for listening as we report on the global struggle for social and economic justice. We are out of here.